So back in July, we attended a family wedding, and I actually did the ceremony for that wedding as well. And I was talking to my cousin, and my cousin has been a church person his whole life, just like me. And in the course of the conversation, he said to me, well, we've actually decided to quit going to church. Just can't be bothered anymore. And I was shocked. I never saw that coming with him and his wife. His wife is actually a pastor's daughter. She grew up in church as well. But the truth is, there's more and more people. Okay, now you're all awake. There's more and more people that are checking out of church. Now, you wouldn't know it looking at the crowd here this morning, but if I were to ask you for a show of hands, probably almost every one of us knows of somebody who used to be involved in church and now has checked out and walked away. So church is one of those things that a lot of people just aren't finding time for in their schedule anymore. So the last 3 weeks now, we've been talking about why bother with church. And we've talked about what I feel are some good reasons for being involved in church, staying involved in church, even getting involved in church. We talked about, that church is a loving place, at least if it works the way it's supposed to, and that we all need love. And so coming to a loving environment like this can be a very healthy thing for all of us. We also talked about how church can actually transform you. And that's something that I think most of us probably, if we're honest, would like to see in our lives. There's a few little things that we would probably like to see transformed. And church can help with that, at least if the church is focused on Jesus. Now, there are churches that aren't necessarily focused on Jesus. There's churches that are focused on rules and rituals and all kinds of other things that can actually distract you from Jesus. And those churches, if we're honest, don't necessarily bring transformation. They can actually make your life more difficult. And I fear that some of the people that have walked away from church have done so because that's been their experience. And that's a very sad thing. But then there's a few other good reasons as well. Another good reason for being part of a church is that it helps you understand the Bible. Who doesn't want to understand the Bible? Well, actually, there's probably a lot of people that don't really bother about the Bible nowadays, but a lot of people that are good, honest people have a curiosity about the Bible. But let's be honest, church isn't the only place where you can learn about the Bible. I mean, Google actually can help you learn about the Bible, or you can take Bible college, or you can go and take courses on it, and so on and so forth. So church wouldn't be the only place where you can learn about the Bible, but I would suggest it's probably a fairly good place. Another reason for coming to church is to be involved in a great worship experience. I mean, there's all kinds of different flavors of worship experiences in different churches. You can go to churches that have a more majestic, kind of amazing feeling to it. When Shelley and I were on holidays this summer, we went to some Roman Catholic cathedrals and in France that had an amazing sense of majesty to them, and their worship experience would be very much sort of exaltative like that in those environments. And there's those kinds of churches here in Canada as well. And then there's churches that, are more modern kind of feel. Our church would probably fall into that category. I love the way our music team leads worship here. It's nice and contemporary. I think most people would connect with that feel, but it's God honoring and Jesus focused. And I think that's a beautiful thing. The style isn't nearly as important as the experience is. And my hope is that when you come to church, you experience God's love, God's grace through music as well. But if we're going to be really honest, church isn't the only place that you can experience that. You can experience that in the shower. If you sing, you can experience that in the car. If you're playing your worship music, you can experience it at home, by yourself, with your friends, or whatever. So there's other places where you can experience that as well. And I'm sure probably a lot of you do. Then another thing that you can experience at church is prayer. I mean, one of the big reasons why we have a prayer team is because we feel that that's a very high priority for a lot of people. I'm amazed constantly when I talk to people and I say, "Can I pray for you?" How many people are like, "Yeah, please do." People want to be prayed for. People recognize that this is a good thing, and it's scientifically proven that when you receive prayer, good things actually happen, both in your mental, like your emotions, as well as in your physical body. And so prayer is a wonderful thing. But there again, let's be honest, you don't have to come to church to pray or to receive prayer. You can receive prayer online, you can receive it over the phone. There's many different ways you can receive prayer as well. So church isn't the only place for that, although it's a very good place for that. But today, I want to look at one other thing that you can't experience anywhere else except in church. Now, let me just qualify what I'm going to say today. It's highly influenced by a pastor from Ontario whose name is Bruxy Cavey. And if you want to look him up online, I highly recommend watching him. He's a great teacher, and he has influenced what I'm about to talk about. So, if I were to ask you the question this morning, what is the foundation of truth? What would you say? My guess is if you've been to Sunday school as a child, you would probably say, "Oh, pick me, Jesus." Because we all learned in Sunday school that Jesus is almost always the right answer. Remember that? And that's a good try, but it's actually not the truth. It's not the right answer. Not that Jesus doesn't have anything to do with truth, obviously he does, but he's not the foundation of truth. Now, I can just hear it in my mind right now. Somebody is saying, "Oh, I know, the Bible is the foundation of truth." Now, if you are thinking along those lines, that's a very good Reformed Protestant answer. Because in the Protestant Reformation, the whole focus of Martin Luther was drawing us back to the Bible. And he had the phrase sola scriptura, which in Latin means the Bible alone is our foundation. And so a lot of Protestant churches really focus on the centrality of the Bible. So much so that we actually believe, many of us, that the Bible is the foundation of truth. And not just Christians believe that. Actually, our Muslim friends call us people of the book. So they believe that that is the foundation of our truth as well. but you're actually wrong. The Bible isn't the foundation of truth either. See, Christianity actually isn't founded on the Bible. Now, I know some of you are going, oh boy, where is he going with this now? See, actually, Christianity is founded on a relationship with Jesus. And Jesus' relationship with us was made possible because of an event called the resurrection. And the resurrection is the most well-documented historical event in history. And because of the resurrection, we can have a relationship with Jesus Christ today. And that is the foundation of Christianity, a relationship, not a book. Now, we understand our relationship through understanding the Bible. The Bible helps us to understand how to relate to Jesus, and that is very, very important and very central to what we are about. But the relationship is the foundation, not the book. And that's important to remember. And here is an interesting thing. See, I think we as Christians actually have almost imperceptibly drifted towards making the Bible the foundation for our faith. The problem with that is that when you do that, the heroes of the faith become scholars and intellectuals, people who can study the book. And that's not who Jesus made the heroes. As a matter of fact, Jesus had his harshest words to say to the scholars and the intellectuals. The heroes of the Christian faith are actually the people that become like Jesus. How do you become like Jesus? By rubbing shoulders with him, by having a relationship with him. And that is the key to Christianity. So I want to go to a scripture, now that I've told you that scripture is not the key. 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 14 and 15. Now here's the thing. This was written by St. Paul, the apostle. He was a scholar. He was a Jewish scholar trained by Gamaliel, who was the most respected scholar of that day. And then he converted to Christianity, and he actually says, I'm letting go of all of my scholastic pedigree to follow Jesus. And now he's writing to his apprentice here, Timothy, and he's saying, I'm writing these things to you now, even though I hope to be with you soon, so that if I am delayed, you will know how people must conduct themselves in the house of God. This is the church of the living God, which is the pillar and foundation of truth. So the pillar and foundation of truth is not the Bible, is not Jesus, it's the church. You see that? The church. Are you sure they didn't make a mistake when they translated that? How can that be? The church. Well, actually, the church plays a profound role in upholding truth in this world. And this is amazing to me. See, when we gather together as the church, God speaks. And he speaks through various different people in different ways. And as He speaks through us, through different people, truth emerges. And this is the profound part of the truth. It's something that nobody has the corner on, in the sense that none of us have the full truth. We all bring aspects of the truth, and together, when we gather, God paints the picture of truth through each one of us and the contribution to that we all bring. And this is a beautiful thing. We can't do this apart from each other. We are dependent on each other for God to speak His truth to each other. And this is where I fear that our culture may actually end up in a cul-de-sac if we begin to isolate ourselves from each other too much. Because we need each other. We need the community of worship together in order to preserve and build and understand genuine truth from God. See, for those that believe that the Bible is the foundation of truth, the truth is, if you look at history, Christians actually worshiped Jesus and followed Jesus, and Christianity grew profoundly for about 300 years before there even was a Bible. What were they doing? How did they know what the truth was? Well, they gathered like us, and each person brought what God had initiated in their heart, the truth that God was enlightening them with, and together they experienced God speaking to them through everyone's contribution. It was a beautiful thing. And I believe that's how God still wants to work. And to this day, there are cultures and countries where the Bible is forbidden. You go to different countries in the world, like China, for example, or some Muslim countries where the Bible... And what do you do if you can't have a Bible? Well, you gather as believers and trust God to speak as the church gathers together. This is how Christianity has always functioned. And so I believe this is key for all of us, whether you lived in the beginning of Christianity or you live in the 21st century. We need each other to uphold truth, so that we base our lives on genuine truth. When Christians gather, God speaks. I want to look at one more scripture in Ephesians chapter 4, starting in verse 11. And there it says, "Now these are the gifts Christ gave to the church, the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and teachers. Their responsibility is to equip God's people to do His work and build up the church, the body of Christ. This will continue until we all come to such unity of the faith, in our faith and knowledge of God's Son, that we will be mature in the Lord, measuring up to the full and complete standard of Christ. Then we will no longer be immature like children. We won't be tossed and blown about by every wind of new teaching. We will not be influenced when people try to trick us with lies so clever that they sound like the truth. Instead, we will speak the truth in love, growing in every way more and more like Christ, who is the head of His body, the church. He makes the whole body fit together perfectly. As each part does its own special work, it helps the other parts grow, so that the whole body is healthy and growing and full of love." What a beautiful way to summarize what we're trying to say here. Jesus gave gifts to us in each other. Gifts that help us grow and mature so that we aren't tricked or led astray by things that sound like truth but aren't actually truth. And as a result of that, we all mature and grow into the full measure of what we were created to be. That's what Jesus really wants for you and me. He wants us to fully blossom and thrive as people. He wants us to be the best you can possibly be. That's his intention. And this happens as we gather together and share with one another what God brings to the surface in our lives. It's a beautiful thing when you see it happening. It's almost like this interlocking web. You know, I'm not an engineer, but I've heard it said that the triangle is one of the strongest engineering things there is. And when you look at trusses, for example, they're made out of these triangles. And you look at bridges and all of those things, they have all these triangles in them. And the way that those become so strong is because they're all interconnected, bracing each other in different ways. And it's almost like I envision the church sort of being like that with regards to truth. We're all interconnected and bracing one another so that we become strong together. And truth prospers. And what is it the Bible says? The truth will set you free. So as we together explore and develop and find truth, we all become free and strong. It's a wonderful thing. Yeah, but Dallas, I don't like people. People bother me, they scare me, they hurt me. I just want to do this on my own, okay? I can figure this out on my own. I'll just do my truth. And certainly there's lots of people that do their own truth and so on. But I submit to you that one of the profound weaknesses in that approach that scares me is that generally speaking, we as humans perceive truth to be what is familiar to us. What is familiar to us feels like truth. And if you doubt me on this, you need to have a little bit of a cross-cultural experience. When you go to another culture, you begin to experience there's different ways of understanding truth than what you are familiar with. And initially it can feel like, this just does not make sense. No, you guys are all crazy. And the truth is that we have this amazing ability to rationalize what feels familiar to us so that we believe that it's truth. I often say this to Shelley, the mind of a human is never as creative as when it's trying to justify itself. And for all of you that are parents, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Kids have all these wonderful, perfectly logical reasons for explaining why they did what they did. And we're just big kids, let's be honest. And so we can easily end up painting ourselves into the corner with our own perfectly logical reasonings when we isolate ourselves from other people who are seeking the truth. And that is a very dangerous place to be. See, the truth is that we are all part of a process. We're part of a process of growth and transformation. The question is, who are you going to let influence the process you're involved in? And that's where we need to choose that carefully. And this is where I make an argument that allowing other people of faith, like in a church, to influence our transformation is a good way to go. Now, part of the transformation that happens in the church happens through teaching like this. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. But I would submit to you, as much as I value my own job, that most transformation within the church is actually more caught than taught. And for you, those of you that are parents, you know what I'm talking about there. Your kids catch your values more than they hear you teaching your values. As much as we try hard as parents to teach really good values, the truth is we do a phenomenal job of teaching our values. It's just that we aren't conscious of the fact that we're teaching our values because we're modeling them for them, and they catch them. Whether we want them to catch them or not, they catch them. And, you know, sometimes you meet a child and they may have certain characteristics that are, you know, outstanding, whether positive or negative, and you wonder, how are we going to deal with this? And then you meet the parent and you realize the child is imitating the parent. They've caught the value. And it's the same thing in the church. We catch values from each other, from hopefully God ultimately, more so than verbally teaching them. We are influenced by the people that we rub shoulders with. And it's kind of a little bit like learning a new culture. Now, some of you have moved to Whitecourt from other cultures, whether those cultures were in Canada or not, like the French culture or the Newfoundland culture, or I came from Sweden, which is a different culture, and you've had a cross-cultural experience. Now, when people move here from another culture, I usually tell them, you need to give it at least 2 years before you go back home. Or if it's Newfoundland, back home. Because it takes 2 years, sociologists say, to fully begin to understand the new culture. For the first 2 years, we go through our lives going, why are they doing that? That's crazy. That's just weird. How can they think like that? And we might not verbalize that, but that's the normal reaction when you make a cultural shift. And then after 2 years, there's a process starts called, and sociologists call this, forming a third culture. When you form a third culture, you pick and choose values from the two cultures that you now have one foot in each culture. So if you come from Newfoundland, for example, you'll say, well, you know, I love this about the way Newfoundlanders live, so I'm going to hang on to that. But I also appreciate this about the way Albertans live, and so I'm going to adopt that. And you end up with a unique third culture that's a hybrid of the two cultures. So for me, for example, I have a third culture that's a unique, for me, hybrid of Swedish culture and Canadian culture. So there's certain things from Sweden that I've embraced and I like it, so I'm not going to let it go. But that means that I don't fully fit into Canadian culture because I'm partially Swedish, but I don't fully fit into Swedish culture either because there's certain things about Canadian culture that I'm hanging on to too because I like those things. For example, for Swedes, it's not important to own your own home. Lots of Swedes grow up renting an apartment for their whole life long. It's just not important to them. Travel is important to them. So they spend their money traveling, and if you go to any travel attraction in the world, you're likely going to find Swedes there because they just love travel. Well, that's a value that I did not embrace from Sweden. I embraced the Canadian value, which says owning your own home is a good thing. And so we bought our own home, and we've not been able to travel nearly as much as what Swedes do as a result of that, because we felt, no, it's important to own our own home. So these are just differing things between different cultures. And so I have a third culture. So Dallas, what's this got to do with truth? Well, you see, the fact of the matter is that as Christians, as Christ followers, we are actually in the process of forming a third culture. We come out of the culture that we were born into in our society, and then we start rubbing shoulders with other Christ followers who are actually influencing us to think like Jesus. And Jesus represents a very different approach to life than what our prevalent culture does. And so you have this cross-cultural experience. And I think some people who come into the church initially kind of go, what? You guys, what? How do you make that work? Like, that doesn't make any sense. But if you persevere in the church, you start to, after a couple of years, kind of go, okay, I think I'm starting to get it now. Yeah, I see now how you guys think. And you kind of go, well, I'm not sure if I agree with that, but I could see that. I can see that that works, and I'm willing to embrace that part of what you're doing. And so we're in this transformation process. And a lot of these things are more caught than taught. You might sit here on a Sunday morning and listen to me and kind of go, yeah, talking head, whatever, yeah. But then you actually sit down and have coffee with another Christian, and they're saying, yeah, no, this is actually how we live our lives. And you walk away going, they actually do that. Like that stuff that Dallas is talking about, it's not just him kind of flapping his gums. They actually do that. Like, whoa. And that's when it really starts to impact you. Because now it's no longer just a, talking head up here saying, yeah, do this, do that, do the other thing. Now it's actually somebody's actually doing this. And so now at this point, you've got a decision to make. Am I going to let this influence my way of thinking, or am I just going to blow it off or whatever? And so, this is one of the powerful things about church. I believe that as we actually rub shoulders with each other, it moves us forward towards a truth that sets us free. Now, sometimes the road isn't straight, sometimes it's crooked, sometimes there's other influences along the way. Let's face it, church isn't the only influence in our lives. There's all kinds of other influences as well. But I believe that this influence actually is a divine influence that moves us in a very powerful direction. And this is why it's so important for us to be part of a good church. Now, some of you know that one of my hobbies is studying the brain. And I'm kind of jumping back to this whole thing about my own truth. Because our own truth bumps up against other people's truths, and ultimately, I believe, out of that emerges God's truth. But there's an emotional reaction in that process. And for those of you that have studied the brain, you know that our emotions actually affect our brain in very powerful ways. So the front of our brain here is the center of logic, the frontal lobe here. And that's really where we want to make good decisions. But other parts of our brain are influenced by emotion. And actually, the stronger the emotion, the more it actually shuts down the front part of our brain. And we make less logical decisions the stronger the emotion. You don't have to raise your hand, but how many of you have made fantastically well thought out decisions when you were hooting mad? Doesn't happen. Most of the time when we're hooting mad, we make decisions we regret later because they weren't logical, well thought out decisions. And so this is the thing that we need to to foster in a church environment is positive emotions so that we can think clearly. Some people think that you shut your brain off when you go to church. I submit to you, actually, you need to turn your brain on when you come to church, because this is how we learn together. And if we have positive emotions in our brain, it actually enables us to think more clearly, not less clearly. And this is a very important thing. So the more we experience God together as a church, the more my truth becomes God's truth because of His influence in my life, in my heart. One last thing I just want to say. Right now, all of you are sitting there looking at the head of the person in front of you. They have a good-looking head, I'm sure. But this is not how we hear God when we want to get really serious. The truth is, if you want to really hear God, you need to turn your chairs towards each other so that you're face to face with the people of God, not just looking at at the back of each other's heads. I'm not saying that Sunday mornings like this, when we learn together, aren't important, but they're not the most powerful way to hear from God. The most powerful way to hear from God is when we turn to face each other and we listen and we speak to each other. That's when we become the voice of God's truth. And so I encourage you to become part of one of our smaller groupings that meet during the week. I believe this is where God's truth really begins to take hold in our lives. If you want to really hear God's truth, this is where the best place is for that experience. And we've got a number of them. And if you're not sure which one to go to, come see me. I'll help you find your way into the right church, small church family where you can really, really hear God. Because when Christians gather, God speaks. I saw a video on YouTube the other day, and I'm going to read his name because I don't want to mess it up. Nabil Qureshi. Nabil Qureshi was going to Old Dominion University in Virginia. He was on the debate team. He was a brilliant mind. Grew up in a loving Muslim home. He was bright, star kind of material. He went on from university to med school and then later got 3 master's degrees and was just one of those rising star kind of students. He met a young man named David Wood. And the way they met was kind of funny. They were both on the debate team. They were out at a meet where they were going to debate the next day. And after they checked into the hotel, everybody went out to party except for Nabil and David. So Nabil didn't go because of his Muslim convictions. David didn't go because of his Christian convictions. And so they struck up a conversation and they actually started to become friends. So how do 2 friends who are both in the same university and are brilliant and both avid debaters get along with each other, especially when they're from 2 different religions? Well, the way they get along with each other is by debating, of course. And so they started debating their different religions. But as they debated, they began to develop a friendship that went far deeper than their differences. And they really began to actually love and respect and appreciate one another. And so they made this deal. They said, let's honestly explore each other's religions. And so David began to study the Quran with Nabil. And they studied the 5 pillars of the Islam religion. And they looked at it from every angle. They debated it back and forth. And then Nabil started studying the Bible together with David. And they debated it back and forth in every angle. And I'm not going to reiterate the whole long story because it's a long story as Nabil tells it. But in the end, Nabil realized that he had really misunderstood Christianity. He had thought that Christianity was based on the Bible. And he realized it's actually based on a relationship with Jesus as a result of the resurrection. And as a result of that, Nabil actually converted to Christianity. And their friendship got even closer because now they were really on the same page. But here's the thing. The key to their friendship, the key to his conversion even, was not David's debating skills. And it wasn't even that they studied the Bible, and Nabil will tell you this. The key to his conversion was the love he felt from David. He knew that David would take a bullet for him if push came to shove. And I believe that truth and love for one another are deeply interconnected. And those are key things that we are about as Christ followers. We've come to the end of our service, and I've got a question for you. It's up on the screen to think about. How do you know if the way you are thinking is in line with the truth? Now, I've talked a lot about a relationship with Jesus here this morning. I don't know where every one of us are at here. If you are sitting there going, well, I don't know if I have a relationship with Jesus or not. I don't know if I really even know who he is. If you would like to invite him into a relationship this morning, I think that would be a great thing. So I'm going to invite the prayer team to go and stand right over there. And as we close the service today, if you would like somebody to help you introduce you to Jesus and what that might look like, they'll be right over there. You can just slip out of your seat and find your way over there. They would be delighted to help you. If you're here today and you're kind of going, you know what, this truth thing is important. I can see that. And you're not part of a smaller group of believers that, turn their chairs towards one another, I'd encourage you to connect with a small group. I think you would do yourself a huge favor. And then I'd encourage you to wrestle with this question. So, Rodney and Crystal are going to lead us in a song here while we kind of let that sink in for